Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into something a bit bleaker, an era of illness, harsh justice, and humble meals. We're exploring what life was actually like in the Middle Ages. Forget the Hollywood version with shining armor and grand castles. Honestly, most of us wouldn't make it through a day. So before you settle in, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy the content I create. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing how far this community reaches across the globe. Now, lower the lights. Maybe switch on a fan for that gentle ambient noise. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a half-decayed straw mattress crawling with insects and packed with hay that still reeks of the barn it came from just a few months back. No memory foam, no pillows, and forget about Egyptian cotton. All you've got is a wool blanket that hasn't seen a wash since last winter, now heavy enough to rival a small cow thanks to months of dirt and filth. You blink yourself awake to the sound of a distant church bell, the medieval alarm clock, only louder and far less forgiving. Your home is a one-room wooden hut with no windows and a delightful open-concept layout where you, your family, a few animals, and countless household bugs all coexist under the same roof. The smell? It's a full-bodied bouquet. A rich mix of stale ale, human sweat, goat musk, and something you desperately hope isn't mold. But deep down you know it is. Scented candles don't exist, and even if they did, they'd just melt straight into the dirt floor. You try to stretch, only to instantly regret it as the cold bites at your skin and your joints groan in protest. You're 22, which in medieval terms basically makes you middle-aged. Your spine creaks like a rickety wooden door, and your knees crunch like a sack of rocks being jostled by a bewildered peasant. Climbing out of bed is a daily risk. The floor is either damp from last night's rain, seeping through the thatched roof, or crusty from whatever your neighbor's chicken decided to leave behind. Either way, your bare feet are now just another part of the ecosystem. And privacy? That's not a thing. Your whole family, and plus a cousin who moved in and never moved out, are waking up right next to you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no alone time. Just shared space, shared smells, shared everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where solitude doesn't exist because parasites, rodents, and at least 8 other people are always by your side. And that's just the beginning of your day. It only goes downhill from here. You've somehow dragged yourself out of your medieval haystack of misery. Congrats! Now nature calls. And not with a gentle whisper, but a full-blown scream. This is the moment you start longing for your modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, and definitely no sad little plunger lurking in the corner. In the 14th century, answering nature's call is part survival challenge, part community experience, and occasionally a minor public spectacle. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is probably a wooden bucket tucked behind the house, already overflowing thanks to Uncle Wolfstan's unfortunate encounter with some questionable turnips. The smell? Absolutely biblical. You hold your breath, handle your business, and then, here's the kicker, you toss it straight into the street. Yes, the actual street. Technically, you're supposed to yell something like, "Gardy Lou!" Old French for "watch out below," before dumping it out the window. But let's be honest, no one reacts in time. The streets of medieval towns are open sewers, a lovely flowing cocktail of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery fluids you definitely don't want to investigate. If you happen to live in one of the rare towns with public latrines, congrats. Sort of. That means you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a communal outhouse where privacy is non-existent, and ventilation is more fantasy than function. You might exchange a bit of small talk, but whatever you do, don't inhale too deeply. As for toilet paper, doesn't exist. Never has, never will. At least not in your lifetime. Most folks clean up with whatever's handy: straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling fancy, a bit of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might help explain why handshakes hadn't quite caught on yet. And if you're in a castle, surely things are better, right? Well, kind of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist straight into the moat below. Charming. Brilliant concept. Except your enemies know about it. Yes, attackers sometimes crawled up through the waist chute. Talk about sneaking in the back door. So, whether you're a humble farmer or a high-ranking baron, using the bathroom in the Middle Ages is basically a humiliation ritual. It's cold, it's public, it's risky, and it's always, without exception, absolutely revolting. One wrong step on a slick stone path and you're face down in the remnants of everyone's worst decisions. And you haven't even brushed your teeth yet. We'll get to that. But hey, you survived the bathroom. Surely that earns you a reward, right? Maybe a warm, hearty breakfast? Not so fast. This is medieval Europe. Comfort doesn't live here. Breakfast, if you can even call it that, is a bleak and joyless experience. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machines hissing to life, and definitely no avocado toast in sight. You sit, or more likely crouch, near the fire staring into a wooden bowl filled with something that looks like it was scraped off the bottom of a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily serving of pottage. It's a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever scraps you manage to gather. Roots, grains, wilted greens, and maybe a questionable chunk of meat if you're lucky. Grains, root veggies, and if fortune smiles on you, a few beans. That's the lineup. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes even weeks, with fresh ingredients simply tossed in on top of the old. Less a recipe, more a continuous edible experiment. On the side, you get a chunk of bread so dense and tough it could probably stop an arrow. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often patted out with sawdust, crushed acorns, or whatever else people could scavenge. Because wheat is the stuff of aristocratic dreams. This loaf isn't your friend. You don't slice it, you bargain with it. And as for drinks, forget orange juice or your favorite oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is crawling with parasites and filth. So you kick off your morning with weak ale. Low in alcohol, but high in survival value. Even kids drink it. No one enjoys it, but hey, at least it won't kill you on the spot. Craving some meat or cheese? Keep dreaming. That's reserved for Sundays, saint feast days, and only if your local lord is feeling unusually charitable. Most peasants might taste meat a few times a year, if they're lucky. Fresh fruit? Only when it's in season and hasn't already been turned into wine. And spices? Forget it. Unless you're royalty, even a pinch of pepper costs more than what you earn in a month. Salt is so precious it's often kept under lock and key. So you chew your gritty, rock-hard bread, wash it down with your medieval ale, and try not to dwell on the possibility that a rat had a midnight snack out of your porridge. Breakfast doesn't fuel you. It just happens to you. And now that you're officially underfed, it's time to work like your survival depends on it. Because it absolutely does. So you've endured your bleak medieval meal and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll do much good. Your entire wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. Just one. A coarse wool tunic or a scratchy linen shift you've worn every day for months. Maybe even years. Seasonal fashion isn't a thing. The rule is simple. Wear it until it falls apart or gives you a rash. Underwear? Optional. If you're fortunate, you might have a linen undertunic, but don't get your hopes up. If you're not so lucky, you're going commando beneath layers of itchy, sweaty wool, all hand-stitched by someone who likely had no clue what a seam was supposed to be. There's no washing machine, no real soap, and definitely no dry cleaner in sight. Your clothes are stained, crusty, and carry a scent somewhere between compost heap and pigsty, with just a hint of regret. Even if you wanted to wash your clothes, it's a whole ordeal. You'd need to haul water from the nearest river or heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic with ashes or lie on a washboard. and then hope for a rare sunny day to dry it, which happens maybe 3 times a year. And don't even get me started on shoes. If you're lucky enough to own a pair, they're made of raw, untreated leather, loosely stitched, and provide about as much arch support as a soggy banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot, through mud, dung, and medieval landmines like jagged rocks and puddles, teeming with who knows what. All of this adds up to one grim reality. Your skin absolutely hates you. You itch nonstop. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone's got them. Nobles, scratchy monks, twitchy children. Basically walking insect zoos. There's no escape. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon, mid-conversation with the local priest. And no one will think twice about it. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing. Your scalp a minefield of bites and sores. And if a rash shows up, tough luck. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no reassuring diagnosis. It's probably scabies. But you'll never know. You just keep suffering and carry on. And if you're lucky enough to avoid an infection, congrats. That rash will just tag along for the next 6 months like an unwelcome medieval sidekick. Now that you're suited up in misery and swaddled in damp, scratchy wool, it's time to step outside and begin the slow grind toward exhaustion. You're fully dressed in itches and discomfort. Now flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is risky business. Not emotionally, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. Oral hygiene is about as common as a hot bath, which is to say, almost non-existent. Some folks might gnaw on a twig or swish around some wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are fending for themselves. And they're losing the battle. By your mid-20s, your smile resembles something excavated from a haunted crypt. Cavities are everywhere, your gums are inflamed, and those dark patches on your teeth? That's not just leftover food, that's active decay. There's more rot in your mouth than in a medieval root cellar. And while sugar isn't widespread yet, it's starting to appear more often among the wealthy, and bringing even more dental doom with it. Imported at great expense, sugar is mostly reserved for fancy pastries or as a flashy symbol of wealth. If you're a noble, congrats. You get to destroy your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, the decay just takes its time, worn in slowly by fermented bread, gritty porridge, and a lifetime of relentless chewing. Toothaches? Get comfortable with them. They're like medieval weather, always lingering in the background. The kind of pain that makes you seriously weigh your options. Prayer, heavy drinking, or yanking the tooth out yourself with whatever tools nearby. And that's not an exaggeration. That was the actual treatment. Dentists weren't really a thing yet, but barber surgeons were. Yep, the same guy trimming your hair is also the one yanking out your molars by candlelight with an iron hook. And absolutely no anesthesia. Got an infected tooth? Good luck. Hope you enjoy fevers. Because without antibiotics, a simple tooth infection can spiral into sepsis and end your life. That means you toil on land owned by a lord who almost certainly doesn't know, or care, what your name is. You rise with the sun and don't stop until it vanishes behind the trees. Your tools? A splintered wooden hoe, a dull sickle, and whatever bones in your body haven't given out yet. There are no weekends, no clocking out. Just dawn to dusk labor, 6 days a week. Sunday's your day off, and unless, of course, there's a harvest to bring in, raiders to fend off, or you're too busy praying that your infected toe stops turning black. The work is relentless, backbreaking, and unforgiving. Fields are plowed by hand, or with an ox if you're lucky enough to own one. You dig trenches, scatter seeds, yank weeds, and haul water until your spine curves like the letter S. No one cares if you're exhausted. No one's checking in on your mental health. And if you're a woman, surprise, you're doing all that, plus raising the children too. Clean, cook, spin wool, feed the animals, and try to ignore the fact that your husband's lice are slowly invading your side of the bed. As for the kids, they start pitching in around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and the distant hope of not dying from the flu. And if you're one of the rare few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper. Fantastic. You're still spending your days surrounded by fire, harsh chemicals, or rotting animal parts in a poorly ventilated shack. The pay? Just enough to survive. The perks? Occasional burns, open wounds, and the thrilling chance to break a bone with zero medical support. Catch a fever? Drink some lukewarm beer and power through. You can't afford rest, not even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that too. It's called being replaced. So you grab your shovel, push past the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. And now that your back feels like it's been lit on fire after hours in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because here, temperature isn't tied to seasons. It's just a never-ending punishment from above. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heat, and no way to keep the elements out. Just wooden walls with gaps wide enough to toss a chicken through. Your windows? Covered with cloth, not glass. That fire in the hearth sounds cozy, in theory. But in reality, you don't have enough firewood to keep it burning, because buying wood is costly and collecting it from the forest can get you fined, or worse, since it's often illegal. Yes, you can literally be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. So you bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, crouch beside the fading embers, and still wake up with a frozen nose. Your feet are always cold, usually wet, and your fingers feel like little medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, like it's just considered bad luck. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds like an upgrade, right? Wrong. In summer, your home transforms into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and definitely no deodorant. You sweat straight through your layers, but you can't take them off. Because revealing too much skin is scandalous. Plus, it invites sunburn, bug bites, and a generous helping of social shame. The flies are everywhere, swarming your unwashed skin, and the lingering stench of last week's goat stew slowly fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz relentlessly around your head as you try to sleep, assuming you can even drift off with neighbors shouting and babies wailing in the background. Out in the fields, the sun doesn't just shine, it bakes you. No sunscreen, no hat, unless you've managed to craft one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke isn't treated. It's just called taking a bad turn. So you're either shivering in your drafty hovel, hoping your toes survive until spring, or you're sweating through your one sad pair of socks while your thighs chafe into medieval oblivion. And the one constant, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food's still awful, and there's always more work waiting. Welcome to Climate Control Medieval Edition. It doesn't exist. Feeling thirsty? Want to freshen up? Thinking of splashing a little water on your face to snap out of this damp, itchy fever dream? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend as it's quietly plotting your demise. Let's start with drinking. That nearby stream might look fresh and clear like it belongs in a fantasy film. But here's the twist. It's not. Just upstream, someone probably emptied a chamber pot into it. And if it's not human waste, there's a decent chance a dead pig is slowly rotting in it instead. Parasites, bacteria, and the full microbial cavalry of medieval Europe are lurking in every sip of that fresh stream. That's why people drank beer. Yes, even the children. But before you picture medieval kids doing keg stands, know this. It was small beer, low in alcohol, but high in survival value. Brewing involved boiling the water, making it far safer than whatever mystery liquid trickled through the town ditch. Wine was another option. If you were wealthy enough to afford it and didn't mind starting your day slightly tipsy. And as for bathing, sure, water could be used for cleaning, in theory. But in practice, not so much. Back then, many believed that bathing actually opened your pores and invited illness straight into your body. So staying dirty wasn't just common, it was considered safer. That's right, washing yourself was seen as a health hazard. People believed you were actually cleaner if you left the protective layer of grime baked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly earned reputations as hotspots for gossip, scandal, and the occasional full-blown medieval extracurricular activity. So, of course, the church eventually stepped in and shut many bathhouses down. Too much temptation, not enough modesty, and even if you did want to bathe, it was an ordeal. You'd have to haul water from a well, boil it over a fire, pour it into a leaky wooden tub, and then hope no one else used it before you. Or worse, after you. Rainwater? Collected in open barrels where birds relieve themselves, insects multiply, and moss happily sets up shop. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going in your mouth, on your skin, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages was less a source of life and more a daily gamble. One wrong sip, and you're spending your final days shivering in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and reflecting on every decision that led you there. So next time you turn on the tap, raise a glass to our ancestors. They didn't stand a chance. They didn't have the luxury of safe hydration, so you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like pure despair. Either way, now you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Unfortunately, you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is basically gentle torture with a theology degree. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Whatever ails you, a cough, rash, broken bone, or a looming case of the plague, it all comes down to your humors being out of balance. Medieval science revolved around 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health, they believed, depended on keeping this internal soup perfectly balanced. Spoiler, it rarely was. Got a fever? Must be too much blood. The solution? Bloodletting. That's right. Time to drain your life force into a bowl using either a dull knife or a leech with ambition. And yes, barbers often handled the job. Imagine walking in for a trim and leaving with a side of hemoglobin loss. 2-for-1 special. Feeling sad or anxious? That's obviously too much black bile. The remedy? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge? Or just whispered prayers and a damp cloth while everyone avoids eye contact and quietly starts carving your coffin. Now, if you happen to break a bone or suffer a deep wound, you're in serious danger. There's no anesthesia, unless you count blacking out from the sheer agony. Surgery is performed with blades that haven't seen a wash since the Crusades. Tools are heated over open flames, not to sterilize, but because it makes them look extra terrifying. Antibiotics? Still hundreds of years in the future. Germ theory? Doesn't exist. Illness is blamed on bad air or the possibility that God's just a little disappointed in your moral decisions. Got a stomachache? Clearly the result of sinful thoughts. Better start confessing, and between bouts of vomiting. If things take a turn for the worse, expect another round of leeches, maybe some crushed beetles for good measure, and a priest at your bedside administering last rites. Just in case. At this point, they're prepping you for the only guaranteed cure: death. And if by some miracle you pull through, everyone assumes it was divine mercy. The doctor takes all the credit, and the leech earns a promotion. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine isn't about healing, it's about surviving the cure. After a full day of toil, itching, and involuntary blood loss, you finally shuffle back to your hovel, stomach rumbling, clinging to the one remaining joy in life: a warm meal. Bad news, that long-awaited meal might be plotting your downfall. Let's start with the basics. Food preservation is barely a concept. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or blind hope that the cold winter air keeps things edible. If you're fortunate enough to have meat, it's likely been hanging for days, buzzing with flies soaked in dubious brine, and maybe taste-tested by a rat or two. Bread is the foundation of the medieval diet, but even that's not safe. In poor harvest years, desperate villagers stretch it with fillers like bark, sawdust, or even clay. And if it's rye season, you might get a little extra surprise. Ergot, a toxic fungus that can trigger convulsions, vivid hallucinations, and, in some cases, a not-so-peaceful death. It's like biting into bread spiked with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. Endless turnips. Boiled, mashed, or bobbing in your pottage. Which, if you recall from Chapter 3, is essentially a hot, murky swamp of mystery ingredients that's been simmering nonstop since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit might show up in the fall, but it spoils fast. And sugar. That's a luxury reserved for the wealthy, who hoard it as a status symbol and proudly display their rotting teeth as proof. Dairy? Another risky bet. Fresh milk goes bad within hours. Butter and cheese last longer, but they're packed with bacteria. People eat them anyway because honestly it's that or gnaw on your boot leather. And now, seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg. Worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor means onions, maybe a pinch of salt if fortune smiles, and an overwhelming aftertaste of hardship. Most meals taste like damp burlap dusted with despair, but food isn't just a health risk, it's political. Game animals, they belong to the Lord, not you. Get caught poaching a rabbit, and you could face a fine, prison, or even execution. That's right. Your dinner could literally get you hanged, so as you settle in beside the flickering fire to eat your gray, flavorless stew. Remember, every bite is a gamble. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food isn't about nourishment. It's a test. And now evening has fallen. You've labored, suffered, and barely survived your bowl of questionable stew. You might think the day's winding down, but don't get too comfortable. God is watching. So is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who will snitch if you skip Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just a part of life. It is life. The church governs your calendar, your laws, your education, assuming you can read, your birth, your marriage, your death, and everything in between. Think of the church as your spiritual landlord, and you're constantly behind on rent. Every day revolves around prayer bells. The church rings them morning, noon, and night. Not as a helpful reminder, but because missing a prayer is a sin. Forget to bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream? Double sin. And yes, hell is very real, terrifyingly real. Priests paint it in vivid detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, pitchfork-wielding demons, and endless screaming. If the plague doesn't keep you up at night, eternal damnation will. And don't even think about reading the Bible yourself. It's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's never touched a shovel. You depend entirely on the church to interpret the Word of God for you. So if the priest says your crops failed because you didn't pray hard enough, oh wait, guess what? Time to kneel harder. Tithes are non-negotiable. A tenth of everything you have. Grow wheat, hand over some grain, raise chickens, say goodbye to eggs, and if you have nothing to give, congratulations, you still owe. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays? They're holy days. And there are plenty. While they may give you a break from work, they're not for leisure. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing your sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a suspicious luxury. Questioning the church is a perilous game. Heretics are burned, witches drowned, blasphemers flogged, and skeptics swiftly converted. So you go through the motions. You chant, you bow, and you pray that after surviving this dirt-covered existence, your soul might finally reach paradise, assuming the priest puts in a good word. Because in the Middle Ages, God might be merciful, but the church? Not so much. And if you think being a medieval peasant is brutal, try living it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, obedience, and being largely invisible to society. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like playing life on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From the moment you're born, your path is mostly set. Marry young, have children, serve your husband, and die exhausted. Education? Don't count on it. Unless you're born into nobility and sent to a convent, your education ends about when you master churning butter and mending a tunic. Marriage comes early, really early. Being promised to someone at 12 and pregnant by 14 isn't unusual. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and political alliances. Your opinion? Not required. Once you're married, you're essentially your husband's property. Your role is to bear heirs, feed the household, keep everything running, and stay silent about it. Complain too much and you risk being labeled a nag, or worse, a witch. And that title comes with a bonus execution, drowning or burning, depending on the local trend. Childbirth is a deadly gamble. There's no prenatal care, no sterile instruments, no pain relief. Midwives do what they can, but even the smallest complication can be fatal for the mother, the baby, or both. Some women make it through 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive even one. But don't worry. If the baby does make it out alive, your workload only goes up from there. Now you've got a screaming infant in a lice-infested hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still pull your weight in the fields. There are no breaks. You are the break for everyone else. If you're unmarried, people think you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're seen as vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're considered dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they knew a bit about herbs, had a strong will, or simply gave someone a strange look on a gloomy Tuesday. Even within the church, your role is tightly restricted. Nuns lived under strict, unforgiving rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom to come and go, and your spiritual value was always considered beneath that of men. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer quietly, preferably with a smile. Because even in an age where everyone suffered, women were somehow expected to do it gracefully. So far, you've endured filth, hunger, inequality, and maybe even a rogue goat. But just when you think things can't possibly get worse, enter violence. Loud, bloody, and by medieval standards, perfectly normal. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were anything but peaceful. Law and order mostly meant hoping your local lord wasn't having a bad day. Violence was everywhere, in homes, on streets, across battlefields, during church feuds, and even while waiting your turn at the communal bread oven. Crime was common, punishment was savage, and justice more of a theatrical performance than actual protection. Steal a loaf of bread? You could lose a hand. Accused of lying, prepare to have your tongue pierced. Gossip too much. Say hello to the scold's bridle, a metal mask clamped onto your head with a bar shoved in your mouth. For correction, of course. Now, if you're accused of something more serious, heresy, theft, witchcraft, how do you prove your innocence? Easy. By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal, medieval justice at its finest. One method, plunge your hand into boiling water to grab a stone. If the burn miraculously heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, guilty. Another crowd favorite? Being tossed into a river. Sink and you're innocent, but likely drowned. Float and you're guilty. Congratulations, you'll be punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the grand prize is survival, and the host wants you to lose. If you're sentenced to death, that's a community spectacle. Executions are public entertainment. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, all performed for cheering crowds. People even bring snacks. It's the Middle Ages version of primetime television. As for domestic violence, completely normal. No one questions it. It's just part of life. Husbands were not only allowed but often expected to discipline their wives and children. Street brawls were an everyday occurrence. You could get beaten for something as trivial as glancing the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war? Always looming. Whether it's local feuds, land squabbles, or holy crusades, someone's constantly marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or just plain boredom. Violence in the Middle Ages isn't a failure of the system, it is the system. Everyone lives with the constant awareness that life is fragile, justice is random, and your neighbor might cave in your skull over a wandering pig. So walk carefully, keep your head down, and never trust anyone holding a club. By now, you've survived the lice, the leeches, the laundryless existence, and the ever-present danger of public disembowelment. But now we reach the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and thoroughly unglamorous death. If you're still breathing past 40, you're practically a local legend. People might even call you the Old One, which isn't so much a nickname as it is a statistical anomaly. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy sits somewhere between 30 and 40 years, but that number's weighed down heavily by sky-high infant mortality rates. Nearly half of all children didn't make it past age 5, taken by disease, starvation, or a single harsh winter. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no real chance. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already worn thin. Work started the moment you could stand upright, and by 25, your joints creaked like an old monastery door. You were probably missing a few teeth, maybe a finger, and definitely most of your original optimism. Women faced one of the most brutal threats of all: childbirth. A leading cause of death for medieval women. No painkillers, no medical intervention, just prayers, boiling water, and a hand to squeeze as you bled out on a straw-filled cot. For men, the dangers looked different, but were just as relentless. War, accidents, infection, and a lifetime of backbreaking labor with no safety nets. Farming accidents, infections from simple cuts, a neighbor's drunken outburst, or a crusade that didn't go as planned, danger lurked everywhere. Even a routine walk to the market could turn fatal if you ran into a restless bandit or a short-tempered tax collector. And death didn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it crept in quietly through the plague, turning bustling cities into silent graveyards overnight. Other times it came through famine, dragging on for entire seasons, wiping out whole villages one empty stomach at a time. Or it could be sheer bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your last hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. As for funerals, consider yourself lucky if you got one. Most bodies were buried quickly to prevent the spread of disease. No embalming, no polished coffin, just a hole in the ground, a few rushed prayers, and a shallow pile of dirt. That is, if there was still space left in the overcrowded churchyard. So yes, in medieval times life was brutal, short, and relentlessly stalked by death in all its casual creative forms. There was no retirement. You simply stopped showing up. And speaking of endings, let's turn the page to your final chapter. The medieval dream fades out. So, how's your day been? You woke up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with nothing but hope, nearly fainted from hunger, worked until your spine begged for mercy, clawed your way through itchy wool, prayed not to catch the plague, and narrowly escaped public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages? Gallant swordsmen, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles and grand feasts under candlelit rafters, is just a myth, burnished by fairy tales and fantasy novels. In reality, the medieval world was harsh, unforgiving, and stacked against you from birth. Hierarchy ruled everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congrats. Your odds of survival were slightly better. But even then, one bowl of bad soup could still land you with dysentery and a rushed burial. Not even the nobles were safe from the era's endless misery. Castles were basically drafty stone refrigerators, crawling with fleas, choked with smoke, and built on a foundation of arranged marriages and political chess. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but you also had a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. It wasn't luxury enough, and those simpler times weren't simple. They were exhausting. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything, from childbirth to chewing, came with a price. Life wasn't about leisure. It was about survival. And if you ever found a rare, quiet moment to dream of something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No social mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google, "What's this weird rash?" You lived, suffered, worked, and died within 10 miles of where you were born. But here's the wildest part. Despite everything, people still found reasons to laugh, sing, tell stories, fall in love, and search for meaning. Not because life was kind, but because humans are relentlessly stubborn like that. Even in the bleakest chapters, they carved out moments of light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe offer a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who battled rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Long before she became Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, reformer and towering figure of ambition, she was just Sophie. Born Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst in 1729, she was the daughter of a relatively minor German princely house. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania held little political clout. But Sophie herself, that was another story. She possessed something no title could bestow: razor-sharp intelligence, disarming charm, and a quiet, unshakable hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was rigid and disciplined. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and ambitious, more strategist than nurturer, driven by a fixation on status and social ascent. Her father, a Prussian military officer, remained emotionally distant, more a formal presence than an involved parent. From an early age, Sophie mastered the delicate balance between obedience and quiet cunning. She devoured books, became fluent in multiple languages, and perfected the art of reading a room before ever opening her mouth. Skills that would later become essential for survival in one of Europe's most unforgiving royal courts. When Empress Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia began the search for a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, her eyes turned beyond Russia's borders. Peter, himself of German descent, seemed well suited for a foreign match. And Empress Elizabeth believed that a young, grateful, and malleable bride from abroad would be easier to influence. Sophie checked every box: noble lineage, Lutheran faith, which she would soon be required to renounce, and a growing reputation for grace, intellect, and humility. At just 14 years old, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the frigid capital of Sens, Petersburg, in 1744, dressed in light German fabrics and wearing a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a pawn on a chessboard, but Sophie had no intention of playing anyone else's game. She had her own. To be accepted in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, adopting the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and irreversible. This wasn't just a change of faith, it was the deliberate burning of her past, a step into a foreign empire with no way back. And no one, watching that composed teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat, could have imagined what was coming: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment Sophie set foot in the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began plotting how to become a queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was designed to solidify her position within Russian royalty. But from the outset, it felt more like confinement than coronation. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was no fairy tale prince. Awkward, emotionally stunted, and fixated on toy soldiers, he preferred staging imaginary battles in his chambers over engaging with matters of state or his wife. Some accounts even claim he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and deeply resented the Russian court that had embraced him. making Catherine's new life as consort feel increasingly isolated and precarious. Unlike Peter, Catherine threw herself into Russian life with unwavering resolve. She mastered the language, delved into the nation's past, and committed Orthodox customs to memory. Her desire was to fit in, his was to get away. Their disconnect ran deeper than feelings. It had political weight. The Russian court seethed with whispers, suspicion, and ruthless power struggles. Empress Elizabeth remained firmly in power, but her failing health signaled that change was on the horizon, and everyone was maneuvering for position. Catherine lived under relentless surveillance. Her correspondence was intercepted, her relationships observed, and every action examined. She couldn't rely on her husband, her mother, who still pushed foreign agendas, or even the people who served her. In a world where allies could become accusers in an instant, Catherine navigated with caution and intelligence. She adapted to the court's treacherous ways, building support behind the scenes. She won over military leaders, connected with intellectuals, and earned a name for grace and self-control, standing in sharp contrast to her husband's immature outbursts and his blatant disregard for Russian customs. In private, Catherine immersed herself in the works of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. Though many dismissed her as merely a young consort, she was quietly shaping a vision, for herself and for Russia, centered on strength, learning, and rational governance. Yet one obstacle stood in her way. As long as Peter lived, she remained stuck in limbo, the powerless wife of a man unworthy of the throne. So she bided her time, watching, learning, preparing. Catherine understood the Russian crown wouldn't simply be passed down, it would need to be claimed. In 1762, after nearly 20 years of patience and subtle strategy, her opportunity arrived. Empress Elizabeth was gone, and Peter, now Peter III, had ascended the throne. Catherine moved swiftly and decisively, but Peter's rule quickly began to fall apart. Within mere months, he had alienated the church, provoked the nobility, angered the military, and showered admiration on Prussia, Russia's historic rival. He rolled back important reforms, embarrassed religious leaders, and even spoke openly of divorcing Catherine to wed his mistress. The court, already uneasy with Peter's unpredictable conduct, grew increasingly distant. In the halls of power, military officers, many loyal to Catherine, voiced their discontent. Among the people deeply faithful and proud of their heritage, Peter was seen as a foreign puppet who ridiculed Russian values. Catherine took it all in and acted. In July of that same year, while Peter vacationed at his summer palace, she executed a swift, bloodless coup. Backed by top military leaders, including her lover, Gregory Olaf, and his powerful brothers, Catherine rode through the streets of St. Petersburg in full ceremonial dress. She was declared Empress Catherine II and secured the loyalty of the formidable imperial guard. Caught by surprise and isolated, Peter surrendered just days later. He was arrested and soon after died under suspicious circumstances. Officially, his death was blamed on a hemorrhoidal colic. Unofficially, it was widely believed to be murder. Catherine had become empress, not through bloodline or marriage, but through determination, intelligence, and bold action. It was a remarkable feat. A foreign-born woman with no rightful claim had seized the Russian crown without shedding a drop of blood. But the true test of her reign was only beginning. She now faced the challenge of turning a daring seizure of power into a legacy that would endure. Would the Russian people embrace her? Could she earn the respect of the nobility? And, more critically, could she maintain control of the empire without meeting the same end as Peter? Catherine knew that power won through plotting could slip away just as quickly. To survive and thrive, she had to lead not as a conspirator, but as a true visionary. Thus began her evolution from cautious plotter to reform-minded monarch. Catherine set out to reshape borders, champion Enlightenment ideals, and redefine the very notion of female leadership. With the crown secured, she could have settled into authority, but she chose not to. Her ambitions reached far beyond occupying a throne. She envisioned something far greater. Catherine set her sights on transforming Russia, not just through military might or political reform, but through intellectual awakening. Where Peter had admired Frederick the Great and played with toy soldiers, Catherine revered Voltaire, Diderot, and the daring minds of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the idea that a monarch should serve the people, even as she wielded absolute power. Catherine didn't merely study Enlightenment philosophy, she embodied it. For over 15 years, she exchanged letters with Voltaire, offering praise while also justifying her autocratic rule. She invited Diderot to her court and even bought his entire library to provide him financial support. In private, she immersed herself in legal documents, engaged in reform debates, and carefully shaped policies aimed at modernizing the Russian Empire. In the early years of her reign, Catherine focused heavily on reforming Russian law. In 1767, she established the Legislative Commission, a bold initiative aimed at overhauling the entire legal code of the empire. Her own nakaz, or instruction, served as more than just guidance. It was a disguised political manifesto. It championed principles like equality before the law, condemned the use of torture, and emphasized a ruler's duty to serve the welfare of the people. For an empress in 18th century Russia, her ideas were nothing short of radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to contend with the harsh realities of a sprawling, feudal, and deeply traditional empire, one where the nobility were firmly invested in keeping serfs beneath them. Catherine understood this well, so while she championed reform, she advanced with caution and calculated restraint. She eliminated certain forms of torture, promoted secular education, and established schools and libraries. Yet to maintain the loyalty of the nobility, she also reinforced their authority over the serfs. This was Catherine's delicate balancing act, a philosopher queen in public, a pragmatic ruler behind the scenes. She tread carefully between lofty Enlightenment ideals and the hard realities of Russian politics, between the glittering salons of Paris and the unforgiving corridors of power in Moscow. Catherine's vision for Russia was ambitious, yet carefully measured. She wasn't aiming to turn Russia into a copy of Europe. She was shaping a modern Russia on her own terms. That meant reform, certainly, but enforced with an iron hand, wrapped in a velvet glove. Her ambitions didn't stop at internal transformation. She sought to push Russia's boundaries outward, forging an empire that would command fear, respect, and admiration across the world. While Peter the Great had opened a window to the west, Catherine set out to tear down the walls entirely. Under her rule, Russia's territory expanded more than ever before. She fought wars not merely to secure her throne, but to redefine Europe's borders. Among her most impactful military efforts was her campaign against the Ottoman Empire, a conflict that would mark a major turning point in Russia's rise as a global power. The wars waged through the 1760s and 1770s were driven by more than a hunger for land. They were battles for influence. Catherine viewed herself as the defender of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, and the rightful guardian of Eastern Europe. With commanders like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin leading the charge, Russia secured major victories, seizing Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and long sought access to warm water ports, a prize Russian czars had pursued for generations. These triumphs were more than military, they were deeply symbolic. Each new conquest declared that Russia was no longer Europe's distant, backward relative, but a formidable continental power. Catherine also looked west. Through a series of shrewd agreements and diplomatic moves, she took part in the partitions of Poland, dividing the weakening Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth alongside Austria and Prussia. By the time of the Third Partition in 1795, Poland had vanished from the map, and Russia had absorbed vast territories along with millions of new subjects. But Catherine's expansion wasn't driven by force alone. She also spread influence through culture and development. She founded new cities, extended trade routes, and welcomed German settlers to help cultivate Russian land. Under her rule, the empire transformed into a diverse mosaic, stretching from the frozen Baltic to the sunlit coast of the Black Sea. Throughout it all, Catherine remained the driving force, reading reports, issuing commands, and personally guiding the direction of her growing empire. Detractors called her power-hungry, even imperialistic. But to Catherine, expansion wasn't mere ambition, it was destiny. In her view, a truly great ruler wasn't judged solely by philosophy or reform, but by the reach of their borders. Catherine didn't simply aim to govern Russia. She sought to remake it into a refined empire, one that commanded fear from its foes, earned respect from other nations, and pledged unwavering loyalty to her. Yet despite her intellect and authority, much of Catherine the Great's fame also stemmed from what happened behind palace doors. And no, not all of it took place in hushed library corners. Catherine's personal life became one of the most gossiped about elements of her rule. She had numerous lovers, not just a few, but a deliberate and well-managed succession of them, often much younger, strikingly attractive, and occasionally politically influential. She didn't keep these relationships secret. On the contrary, she openly acknowledged them, frequently granting her favorites noble titles, lavish estates, and generous pensions, provided they remained loyal and discreet. If a lover fell out of favor, they were discreetly dismissed, often with a courteous farewell and even a promotion. Among the most significant of these companions was Grigory Potemkin, a man whose boldness matched his intellect. Their bond blurred the boundaries between romance, politics, and strategic alliance. Some historians even speculate they may have secretly wed. Together they orchestrated military campaigns, launched colonization efforts, and played a central role in transforming southern Russia. Potemkin was far more than a lover. He was, in many respects, her co-ruler. Yet Europe remained fixated on the scandal. Rumors circulated endlessly. Satirical pamphlets portrayed her as overly passionate, insatiable, even deranged. And after her death, the gossip intensified. The most notorious was a vile and entirely fabricated story involving a horse, concocted by her enemies to tarnish her memory and undermine her achievements. But why the relentless fascination? The answer is simple. Catherine was a woman who held power without apology. In an era that demanded female rulers be either virtuous saints or doomed victims, she defied every expectation. She lived boldly, loved freely, and governed with authority. That independence made her not just remarkable, it made her threatening. Ironically, while critics labeled her immoral, Catherine held a thoughtful, even philosophical view of love and sexuality. She saw pleasure as a natural aspect of human life, and believed that private relationships need not interfere with public duty. Unlike many of her male counterparts, she maintained a clear divide between emotion and leadership, managing both with remarkable discipline. In truth, many of her relationships were calculated. Catherine chose partners who were not only devoted, but also skilled and politically advantageous. And when their usefulness ended, she released them, often graciously, with a smile and a comfortable retirement. Her romantic life didn't undermine her authority, it complemented it. It was a deliberate fusion of passion and power that left her unforgettable, admired, and feared. Despite her charisma and command, Catherine's rule was not without danger. In 1773, that danger took the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. But he wasn't just any rebel. He boldly claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's supposedly deceased husband. According to his tale, he had survived the coup and returned to take back the throne from the German usurper. The claim was outrageous, but it struck a nerve. Peter was long dead, but for Russia's downtrodden and weary lower classes, truth was less important than hope. Pugachev promised freedom, an end to serfdom, lighter taxes, and land for the common folk. His message ignited unrest across the Volga River region, rallying Cossacks, peasants, and old believers who saw in him a chance to overturn a brutal system that had long kept them oppressed. At a time when the divide between nobles and serfs had grown painfully vast, Pugachev's promises felt like deliverance. His rebellion erupted into the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were seized, fortresses collapsed, and nobles were brutally killed. For a brief but harrowing moment, it appeared the empire might splinter. Catherine, usually composed, was deeply shaken. This wasn't a distant conflict she could settle with soldiers and diplomacy. This was an uprising from her own people, challenging the very system she governed. But Catherine didn't falter. She responded decisively, deploying trained troops to brutally suppress the rebellion. Pugachev's army fell in 1774. He was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and ultimately executed in Moscow. A public display meant to deter future defiance. After the uprising, Catherine intensified her focus on maintaining order and authority. Her earlier ambitions to free the serfs gradually faded into obscurity. The revolt had exposed the boundaries of Enlightenment ideals in a nation still bound by feudal traditions. She increasingly relied on the nobility, granting them full dominion over their serfs in return for their unwavering support. This marked a pivotal shift. The empress who had once championed Voltaire now placed stability above ideology. Reforms grew more restrained. Surveillance tightened. Even the faintest hint of rebellion was to be crushed before it could take shape. Though Pugachev was executed, the fear he stirred lingered, casting a long shadow over Catherine's rule. A system rooted in inequality could only withstand the pressure for so long before collapse loomed. As Catherine the Great neared the end of her reign, she had led Russia for over 30 years, the longest of any female sovereign in the nation's history. From the day she claimed the throne, she broke conventions, transformed her empire, and reimagined the role of both ruler and woman. During Catherine's rule, Russia emerged as a formidable European power. The empire grew by more than 200,000 square miles, annexing Crimea, regions of Poland, and vast areas along the Black Sea. These gains weren't merely military victories, they were calculated moves to secure warm water ports and transform trade routes. Yet her legacy wasn't confined to territorial expansion. Catherine also made a lasting impact on culture. She played a key role in founding the Hermitage Museum, gathered one of Europe's most impressive art collections, and exchanged ideas with leading Enlightenment thinkers. Her court evolved into a hub of elegance, creativity, and intellectual pursuit. In a nation often dismissed as backward by Western Europe, Catherine firmly established Russia as a cultural force. She advanced education by founding schools for girls and encouraging the publication of books. She also brought smallpox inoculation to Russia, courageously receiving the vaccine herself, a bold endorsement of science in her era. Yet her rule was filled with contradictions. Despite her embrace of Enlightenment principles, she never granted freedom to the serfs. In reality, she pushed serfdom further into Russia's expanding lands. Her reforms, though notable, were largely imposed from above, meant to refine the empire's image rather than overhaul its core structures. Even so, Catherine's reign delivered both stability and bold vision. She grasped that power wasn't simply passed down, it had to be shaped, maintained, and relentlessly protected. She governed not through divine right, but through sheer determination, sharp political insight, and strategic mastery. People called her many things: manipulative, authoritarian, progressive, alluring, but above all, she was effective. By the time of her death in 1796, Russia was richer, larger, and more powerful than it had been in generations. She left a throne firmly held, an empire greatly expanded, and a legacy destined to last for centuries. Catherine didn't simply reign, she commanded with intellect, strategy, and a firm hold on the course of history. In doing so, she transcended the title of empress and became a legend. Despite all her power, conquests, and lasting influence, at her heart she remained a woman forging her path through a world built for men and transforming it to reflect her own vision. Behind the grand portraits and official proclamations was a woman keenly aware of how fragile her authority truly was. She wasn't Russian by birth. She seized the crown through a coup. She governed a nation uneasy with a woman at its helm. And yet she didn't just survive, she flourished. Catherine refused to be merely decorative. She was an avid reader, a tireless writer, and a lifelong learner. Her days were packed, reviewing reports, exchanging letters with foreign leaders, revising government documents, and navigating a court rife with political intrigue. Catherine wasn't satisfied with merely occupying the throne. She wielded it with the skill and dedication of a true stateswoman. In many ways, she was deeply lonely. Though often surrounded by courtiers, lovers, and artists, she confided in her memoirs that genuine trust was rare. She kept her son Paul at a distance from governance, wary he might dismantle everything she had built, an anxiety that only grew as he matured. Her most profound emotional bond with Grigory Potemkin eventually settled into a lasting friendship, but his death in 1791 left a scar that never fully healed. Catherine was deliberate in shaping her image. She recognized the strength of storytelling and used it more skillfully than most rulers of her time. She presented herself as the mother of Russia, a champion of enlightenment, a warrior empress, and a patron of the arts. Yet behind those crafted roles stood a woman who had weathered rejection, betrayal, scandal, and revolt, and continued to persevere. When she passed in 1796, she left behind a changed empire and lingering questions. Could she have gone further to abolish serfdom? Did political realities dilute her Enlightenment principles? Was she truly a reformer or ultimately a ruler above all? History remembers her with a title she never claimed for herself: the Great. Not because she was perfect, gentle, or fair, but because she seized power and ruled by her own design in a world that insisted women should have none. She didn't simply wear the crown, she redefined what it meant to earn one. Deep in the steamy jungles of Chiapas in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque murmur echoes of the ancient Maya. Towering stone temples pierce the treetops, their weathered limestone surfaces worn by centuries, yet still rich with untold stories. Then, in 1994, one of those long-held secrets emerged. A team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was examining Temple 3, a smaller, unassuming structure beside the renowned Temple of the Inscriptions, the resting place of the powerful King Pakal the Great. Temple of the Throne wasn't thought to contain anything remarkable until the team spotted something unusual. Beneath the structure lay a sealed, hidden chamber, untouched by looters, perfectly preserved. When the archaeologists broke through and descended into the darkness, they discovered a stone sarcophagus lying in stillness. The air was dense, saturated with the passage of time. As they lifted the lid, a cloud of red dust billowed out, vivid, startling, almost alive. The interior was coated in powdered cinnabar, a ceremonial and toxic mercury sulfide once used by the Maya in sacred rites. And resting within that crimson haze was the skeleton of a woman. She had been laid to rest with deep care and ceremony. Though delicate, her bones remained whole. Her skull still bore a jade mask, and her body was encircled by precious offerings. Necklaces, diadems, ear spools, all fashioned from jade and shell. Every detail of the burial pointed to royalty. Yet no name was carved to mark her identity. No glyphs revealed her name. It was among the most lavish female burials ever uncovered in Mesoamerica, yet it remained a complete mystery. Why was she entombed in red cinnabar? Who was she? A queen, a high priestess, or perhaps the consort of Pakal himself? Researchers dubbed her the Red Queen, a title that endured. But even with advanced forensic analysis, her identity remained uncertain. All they could confirm was that she lived in the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was deliberately concealed, undisturbed, and set apart. Her burial wasn't just a ceremony, it was a spiritual act. She wasn't intended to be remembered by name or inscription, but through ritual, through vivid color, and through the enigma she became. The most haunting element of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't the gleam of her jade ornaments or the stillness of the sealed chamber. It was the red dust. A dense coating of powdered cinnabar enveloped everything: the sarcophagus, the chamber walls, her bones, and the treasures placed beside her. It clung like blood to stone. For the Maya, this was no mere decoration. Cinnabar, derived from a ground mercury sulfide, was both sacred and perilous, one of the most revered and hazardous substances of the ancient world. Its vivid red hue wasn't merely for show, it carried profound meaning. It represented blood, rebirth, and the vital energy linking humans to the divine. Red was sacred to the Maya, the color of dawn, of sacrifice, of life rising from death. And its use wasn't just symbolic, it was deeply spiritual. Enveloping the dead in cinnabar was a ritual of transformation, intended not to preserve the body forever, but to prepare it for a sacred passage into the next realm. In Maya belief, death marked a transition, not a conclusion, but a journey into another layer of the cosmos. The Red Queen, whoever she truly was, wasn't merely being laid to rest, she was being readied for divinity. But there's a deeper irony here. Cinnabar is highly toxic. Prolonged exposure can cause mercury poisoning, triggering tremors, hallucinations, and even death. The Maya may not have known the chemistry, but they sensed its force. Cinnabar was volatile, potent, and dangerous. To coat a body in it was a bold statement. This was no ordinary being. In Palenque, only a rare few were entombed with cinnabar. One of them was Pakal the Great, the powerful king whose towering pyramid still commands the site. Like hers, his body had been entirely covered in the red powder. That single striking detail sparked intense speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or a figure of comparable divine stature? Her skull had been laid upon jaguar skin, a powerful sacred symbol. Surrounding her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and tiny jade figurines, objects that suggested rituals carried out, either during her life or as part of her funerary rites. Every element of her burial spoke volumes without a single inscription. It was a story of power wrapped in mystery, a woman ready to enter the underworld not quietly but through ritual, steeped in the color of sacrifice. Encircling the Red Queen's cinnabar-covered remains was a hush, broken only by the shimmer of jade, shell, and obsidian. These were far more than decorations. They were offerings, each deliberately selected to guide her into the Maya afterlife, Xibalba. At her sides lay jade necklaces, weighty and cool, their smooth surfaces still gleaming after centuries beneath the earth. Jade wasn't prized just for its beauty. To the Maya, it was sacred, a powerful emblem of eternal life. It symbolized the green of maize, the life force of the jungle, and the sacred breath of the gods. Jade was reserved for the elite, and in the Red Queen's case, it adorned her chest, wrists, and ears. Clear evidence that she held power and perhaps even divine favor in life. Among the most haunting artifacts was the jade funerary mask, gently laid over her face, a final tribute to her status and mystery. Unlike the golden death masks of Egypt, hers was understated, crafted from dozens of small jade mosaic tiles, carefully shaped to follow the contours of her face. This mask had a ritual purpose: to shield the soul, preserve her identity, and present her as divine before the gods. Nearby, scattered around her remains, lay bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts, each one a piece of the spiritual puzzle that marked her passage to the afterlife. These items may have served as ritual tools or emblems of her role, perhaps as a priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin bore an engraving, faint but deliberate, a quiet trace of her voice, now swallowed by time. At her feet and lining the tomb's edges were sealed ceramic vessels, likely once filled with offerings, food, drink, or incense, to nourish and guide her spirit in the world beyond death. The Maya saw the afterlife as a perilous journey, complex, layered, and fraught with trials. These objects weren't lavish extras, they were vital provisions. To modern eyes, the tomb feels personal. Not excessive, but deliberate. There was no gold, no grand display, no ceremonial chariots, only items selected with deep spiritual meaning. It was a roadmap for the soul's passage. Through these sacred objects, we catch a glimpse of how the Maya viewed death. Not as an end, but as a transformation of power. The Red Queen was not laid to rest to be forgotten. She was being readied for ascension. Yet despite the richness of her tomb, one haunting absence remains. No name, no inscription graced her sarcophagus. No glyphs on the walls revealed who she truly was. She was undeniably someone of great importance. But who exactly? From the moment her tomb was uncovered, scholars began piecing together the mystery. The most compelling theory suggests that the Red Queen was Zakbu Ajao, the wife of Kainich Janab Pakal, known today as Pakal the Great, the most renowned ruler of Palenque. Zakbu Ajao was far more than a royal spouse. She was born into nobility and entered Palenque's royal dynasty through marriage at a young age. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, all of whom rose to positions of prominence, and she held a significant ceremonial role during Pakal's reign. If any woman deserved such an honored burial, it was Zakbu Ajao. It represented blood, rebirth, and the vital energy linking humans to the divine. Red was sacred to the Maya, the color of dawn, of sacrifice, of life rising from death. And its use wasn't just symbolic, it was deeply spiritual. Enveloping the dead in cinnabar was a ritual of transformation, intended not to preserve the body forever, but to prepare it for a sacred passage into the next realm. In Maya belief, death marked a transition, not a conclusion, but a journey into another layer of the cosmos. The Red Queen, whoever she truly was, wasn't merely being laid to rest, she was being readied for divinity. But there's a deeper irony here. Cinnabar is highly toxic. Prolonged exposure can cause mercury poisoning, triggering tremors, hallucinations, and even death. The Maya may not have known the chemistry, but they sensed its force. Cinnabar was volatile, potent, and dangerous. To coat a body in it was a bold statement. This was no ordinary being. In Palenque, only a rare few were entombed with cinnabar. One of them was Pakal the Great, the powerful king whose towering pyramid still commands the site. Like hers, his body had been entirely covered in the red powder. That single striking detail sparked intense speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or a figure of comparable divine stature? Her skull had been laid upon jaguar skin, a powerful sacred symbol. Surrounding her were bone needles, obsidian blades, and tiny jade figurines, objects that suggested rituals carried out, either during her life or as part of her funerary rites. Every element of her burial spoke volumes without a single inscription. It was a story of power wrapped in mystery, a woman ready to enter the underworld not quietly but through ritual, steeped in the color of sacrifice. Encircling the Red Queen's cinnabar-covered remains was a hush, broken only by the shimmer of jade, shell, and obsidian. These were far more than decorations. They were offerings, each deliberately selected to guide her into the Maya afterlife, Xibalba. At her sides lay jade necklaces, weighty and cool, their smooth surfaces still gleaming after centuries beneath the earth. Jade wasn't prized just for its beauty. To the Maya, it was sacred, a powerful emblem of eternal life. It symbolized the green of maize, the life force of the jungle, and the sacred breath of the gods. Jade was reserved for the elite, and in the Red Queen's case, it adorned her chest, wrists, and ears. Clear evidence that she held power and perhaps even divine favor in life. Among the most haunting artifacts was the jade funerary mask, gently laid over her face, a final tribute to her status and mystery. Unlike the golden death masks of Egypt, hers was understated, crafted from dozens of small jade mosaic tiles, carefully shaped to follow the contours of her face. This mask had a ritual purpose: to shield the soul, preserve her identity, and present her as divine before the gods. Nearby, scattered around her remains, lay bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts, each one a piece of the spiritual puzzle that marked her passage to the afterlife. These items may have served as ritual tools or emblems of her role, perhaps as a priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One bone pin bore an engraving, faint but deliberate, a quiet trace of her voice, now swallowed by time. At her feet and lining the tomb's edges were sealed ceramic vessels, likely once filled with offerings, food, drink, or incense, to nourish and guide her spirit in the world beyond death. The Maya saw the afterlife as a perilous journey, complex, layered, and fraught with trials. These objects weren't lavish extras, they were vital provisions. To modern eyes, the tomb feels personal, not excessive, but deliberate. There was no gold, no grand display, no ceremonial chariots, only items selected with deep spiritual meaning. It was a roadmap for the soul's passage. Through these sacred objects, we catch a glimpse of how the Maya viewed death. Not as an end, but as a transformation of power. The Red Queen was not laid to rest to be forgotten. She was being readied for ascension. Yet despite the richness of her tomb, one haunting absence remains. No name, no inscription graced her sarcophagus. No glyphs on the walls revealed who she truly was. She was undeniably someone of great importance. But who exactly? From the moment her tomb was uncovered, scholars began piecing together the mystery. The most compelling theories suggest that the Red Queen was Zakbu Ajao, the wife of Kainich Janab Pakal, known today as Pakal the Great, the most renowned ruler of Palenque. Zakbu Ajao was far more than a royal spouse. She was born into nobility and entered Palenque's royal dynasty through marriage at a young age. She gave birth to at least 3 sons, all of whom rose to positions of prominence, and she held a significant ceremonial role during Pakal's reign. If any woman deserved such an honored burial, it was Zakbu Ajao, but it conceals something far more intimate. A sealed crypt, undisturbed by looters and remarkably preserved. Hidden deep within the temple's core, the chamber could only be reached by a steep, narrow staircase, a path as secretive as the life it memorialized. The descent into her tomb feels deeply symbolic, a ritual passage into the underworld itself. The chamber is plain, built from cut stone and sealed undisturbed for over 1,130 years. No glyphs line the walls, no murals or carvings narrate her story. But perhaps that silence was deliberate. This was not a place meant for the living to read, but for the dead to be reborn. A sacred space of transformation, not remembrance. At the center, her limestone sarcophagus rests like a solemn altar, subtly reflecting the monumental stone coffin of Pakal nearby. While Pakal's lid is famously etched with elaborate scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's burial is far more restrained. The emphasis is inward, on the body, the cinnabar, and the sacred process of death as transformation. Still, the structure offers quiet architectural clues with deeper meaning. The tomb's east-west alignment echoes the sun's passage from dawn to dusk, life to death. Though compact, the chamber holds a striking presence. It feels intentional, intimate, a hallowed space for someone honored. Maya temples weren't just buildings, they served as cosmic instruments, linking sky, earth, and the underworld. Being laid to rest in such a place meant rising above the mortal world. The Red Queen's final resting place wasn't incidental. It was a purposefully built sanctuary where death signified rebirth. Her remains lie in stone, her spirit preserved in cinnabar, and her story etched into the very structure. A temple that silently proclaims her significance. For the ancient Maya, death marked not a conclusion but a gateway, a sacred transition into the underworld called Xibalba. For a figure like the Red Queen, this journey was more than spiritual. It was also political, cosmic, and profoundly ceremonial. Funerary rites were meticulously staged, grounded in mythology, and designed to lead the soul through the perilous realms of the afterlife. Maya inscriptions and imagery revealed that Cybele wasn't a serene afterlife. It was a shadowy labyrinth filled with blood rivers, daunting trials, and death deities. Only those given proper burials, sacred rites, and spiritual protection stood a chance of completing the journey. The Red Queen was interred with care, shrouded in cinnabar, sealed in stone, and encircled by offerings. These were unmistakable markers of a high-status burial, but the tomb held deeper meaning. The discovery of bone needles and obsidian blades suggests the presence of auto-sacrifice rites, perhaps tools she once used in life, or that played a role in rituals during her burial to strengthen her spirit. Her funerary mask, meticulously crafted from jade tiles, was far more than ornament. It carried powerful symbolic weight. The mask may have functioned as a spiritual vessel, safeguarding her face and identity as she passed into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face reflected the soul, and for the soul to be acknowledged by the gods, it had to be recognizable. The ceramic vessels placed around her likely once contained chocolate, maize, water, or pulque, offerings meant to sustain her beyond this life. Objects like stingray spines or shell trumpets may have symbolized sacred instruments, means of summoning deities or conducting ritual dialogue. For the Maya, burial wasn't a farewell, it was a metamorphosis. They viewed existence as cyclical, death as the seed, burial as the planting, and the afterlife as a form of renewal. Royals, including kings and queens, were often regarded as living embodiments of divine beings. In death, they were believed to return to their divine source. The Red Queen, cloaked in the red of blood, sealed within a pyramid and surrounded by sacred offerings, was being readied for rebirth, not as a mere mortal, but as a figure bound to the cosmic order. Her interment wasn't a final chapter, it marked the rise of her legend. Only a short distance from the Red Queen's resting place stands one of Mesoamerica's most renowned tombs, that of Kinich Janab Pakal, known as Pakal the Great. His interment within the majestic Temple of the Inscriptions is famed for its grandeur, craftsmanship, and profound spiritual meaning. Yet what sets the Red Queen's tomb apart isn't just its contents, it's the remarkable location where it was uncovered. Her sarcophagus lay concealed within Temple 3, situated right beside Pakal's monumental tomb. In a city like Palong, where each temple's placement echoed celestial order, such proximity wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, a message carved in stone. Many researchers believe the Red Queen was Zakbu Ajao, Pakal's queen and esteemed consort. Though her tomb bears no inscriptions, the parallels between their burials are remarkable. Both were shrouded in cinnabar, ate to rest in pyramids, adorned with jade, and honored with profound reverence. Their rites reflect one another, like twin chapters in a divine story. Pakal's tomb lid famously shows him descending into the underworld tree, a cosmic vision of death and renewal. The Red Queen's more modest tomb may lack carved imagery, but its meaning is found in the connection it shares with Pakal's. If Pakal symbolized the sun, traveling through the underworld by night to be reborn each day, then the Red Queen could embody the moon, a feminine presence tracing her own enigmatic path across the heavens. Together they formed a sacred cosmic duality. Masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, structure and ceremony. In Maya belief, rulership wasn't a solitary role but a shared dynamic. Cosmic harmony depended on equilibrium, and that principle extended into royal governance. By entombing the Red Queen beside Pakal, the Maya weren't just commemorating a union. They were enshrining a celestial alliance. Their closeness in death likely reflected their partnership in life. A queen not in the shadow, but at the side of her king, united in rule and remembrance. In silence, their tombs tell a story. Two spirits encased in cinnabar and stone, bound together across the ages. It is one of history's most profound silences. Though her name has faded with time, the Red Queen of Palanque endures, not as a lost figure, but as one of the most mysterious and influential women of the ancient world. Her tomb, untouched for more than 1,300 years, now speaks softly through time, raising questions that only grow louder with each new find. She remains an enigma, resisting complete understanding. Her true identity may always elude us. No glyph recorded her name, no stela preserved her tale. Yet the deliberate nature of her burial, the abundance of offerings, and the vivid symbolism of her cinnabar-stained remains all point to a woman of deep significance, not just as a queen or consort, but as a figure of genuine power, sacred presence, and noble lineage. Today, the Red Queen compels us to reconsider what we think we know, us to re-examine long-held assumptions. She stands as a powerful reminder that in the world of the ancient Maya, women were not voiceless. They led sacred ceremonies, ruled over cities, and played pivotal roles in shaping dynasties. While kings like Pakal have dominated historical narratives, the Red Queen's reappearance reminds us that authority and influence were never the sole domain of men. It moved through mothers, queens, priestesses, and seers. Her legacy goes beyond the artifacts she left. It lives in the questions she's sparked among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Each jade bead, each coat of cinnabar, every architectural detail of her temple speaks with intention. This woman mattered. And maybe that's the most remarkable part of her story. Not what's known, but what remains unanswered. The Red Queen shows us that history is more than facts. It's a living mystery, a collective yearning to reach across time. In that way, her legacy continues to grow. She rests shrouded in red, the hue of life and offering, of blood and renewal. Her face, once veiled by a jade mask, now meets us through the lenses of science, creativity, and awe. She has no name, yet she is not without a voice. Enigmatic, but far from lost. In life, the Red Queen may have governed a kingdom, but in death, she reigns over something far grander: our imagination. Though her tomb was closed in stone and her story etched in silence, she continues to speak. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the lively neighborhood of Coyoacán, then a small village beyond the edge of Mexico City. Her childhood home, La Casa Azul, or the Blue House, was steeped in vivid colors, deep contrasts, and a quiet resilience. In time, it would transform into her refuge, her arena, and ultimately a museum honoring one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilde Calderón, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were a study in contrasts: Guillermo, quiet and thoughtful; Matilde, deeply religious and emotionally distant. Frida would come to embody her father's reflective nature and creative vision, while also inheriting her mother's unwavering strength. As a young girl, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and fearless. She devoured books and posed questions that often unsettled the adults around her. At 6, she was struck by polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker, a condition she later concealed with long skirts. Still, she never let it diminish her fierce spirit. The illness confined her to bed for months, separating her from other children and deepening her sense of solitude. During this period, she formed a strong bond with her father, who motivated her to stay active through cycling and exercise, her intellectual curiosity. Unlike many girls of her era, Frida didn't dream of marriage or domestic life. She set her sights on becoming a doctor and, at 15, was accepted into the esteemed National Preparatory School in Mexico City. She was one of the few girls admitted, and quickly distinguished herself not only through her intellect, but with her sharp humor, bold ideas, and distinctive style. Frida became part of a circle of young thinkers called the Cachuchas, who passionately discussed philosophy, literature, and politics. She was captivated by revolution, by ideas that pushed against the boundaries of tradition. Even in those formative years before the bus accident that would reshape her body and the fame that would shape her legacy, Frida Kahlo was already carving her place in the world with bold lines, defiant beliefs, and a selfhood far too expansive to conform to anyone else's expectations. She wasn't simply coming of age in Coyoacan. She was quietly laying the groundwork to reinvent herself completely. On September 17, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life was irrevocably divided. The girl she had been and the woman she would be forced to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing, perhaps even bickering. A moment of ordinary youth just before everything changed. Frida never did anything halfway. But just moments later, a streetcar slammed into the bus, and in a heartbeat, her future dissolved into agony, twisted metal, and eerie quiet. The collision was devastating. The streetcar smashed the bus against a wall, shattering wood and hurling passengers. Frida was pierced by an iron handrail. The rail entered through her left hip and exited her pelvis. Her spine was fractured in 3 places. Her right leg was crushed, her foot had been dislocated. She suffered broken ribs and collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, and a punctured abdomen. She was only 18. Someone covered her with a borrowed coat. Another person noticed her body shimmering, not with blood, but with the fine gold powder she'd been carrying in a pouch. It had burst on impact, coating her injured body in what looked like sparkling ash. Frida was rushed to the Red Cross hospital, where she endured multiple surgeries over the next several months. She spent weeks immobilized in a body cast, lying flat, battling infection and facing an uncertain future. The future she had once envisioned, becoming a doctor, drifted further out of reach with each passing day. Yet in that silence, something new began to awaken. Her father brought her brushes. Her mother fashioned a custom easel that hung over her bed. A mirror was mounted above so she could see her reflection. And there, encased in plaster and pain, Frida began to paint. At first, she painted to pass the time, then it became an obsession. Her earliest subjects were her own reflection, simply because she was all she had. But this wasn't born of vanity, it was an act of survival. The crash had shattered her body, but it also unlocked something deeper. A doorway into her own psyche, her physical being, and ultimately into the surreal vocabulary of pain and identity that would come to shape her art. The girl who once dreamed of healing others now began mending herself, one brushstroke at a time. As Frida Kahlo lay confined in plaster and steel, her body waging war with every breath, she turned to painting. What began as a form of therapy quickly transformed into a language, one that was raw, deeply personal, and at times painful to witness. And that was exactly the intention. Frida didn't paint delicate flowers or pleasant landscapes. She painted pain, her own, raw, physical, emotional, and existential. Her early works were self-portraits, not out of vanity, but because, as she once said, "I paint myself because I am so often alone and because I am the subject I know best." Her early paintings were modest in size, created on tin or wooden panels, drawing inspiration from Mexican retablos, devotional artworks that depict stories of suffering and divine intervention. Frida redirected this tradition inward. Her own body became the canvas, her emotions the altar. She portrayed herself as divided, pierced, and bleeding. In one striking piece, she's shown impaled with nails, a modern-day martyr in her own narrative. In another work, she hovers in a desolate landscape, bound to a crumbling column, a powerful symbol of her broken spine. She painted herself in tears, in pieces, decapitated, exposed, but never passive. Always alert, always gazing back. Her pain was never softened or disguised. She captured the rawness of trauma with a blend of beauty, defiance, and even wit. Every painting was an act of reclaiming her body, her story, and her identity as a woman, in a world that constantly sought to define her. But Frida wasn't simply recounting her story. She was crafting an entirely new kind of visual narrative, one that fused Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical imagery, and rich symbolism. Her paintings became dreamlike dissections of her soul, wrapped in vibrant color, cultural depth, and mythic undertones. By the time she had healed enough to walk again, though with great pain, Frida was no longer the young woman who once aspired to be a doctor. She had become an artist, and her work was unlike anything the world had seen. She transformed the most devastating experience of her life into a wellspring of creativity. Frida Kahlo didn't just depict her pain, she forced the world to confront it. And in doing so, she elevated suffering into a powerful, sacred form of self-expression. In 1928, still healing, still painting, and just 21 years old, Frida Kahlo met the man who would become the most intense and complicated relationship of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 2 decades older, already a towering figure in Mexican art. Both literally and figuratively, Rivera was a giant, celebrated for his expansive, politically infused murals that depicted the struggles and spirit of the Mexican people. Frida had admired his work long before they met. She respected his work, but now she wanted his judgment on hers. Carrying her paintings to the Ministry of Education, she boldly interrupted him mid-mural, asking directly, "Do I have talent?" Diego took one look and answered, "Yes, and not just to be kind." He saw something rare in her art, an unfiltered voice, raw and sincere, pulsing with fury, irony, suffering, and beauty. Their relationship quickly became as intense as it was inspiring. Frida once remarked, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. One in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other," she said, "was Diego." They married in 1929, a union that puzzled many. He was large in stature, famously unfaithful, and politically renowned. She was fiery, fiercely independent, and already relying on a cane to walk. Her parents described it as a union between an elephant and a dove. Their relationship was intense yet tumultuous. Diego encouraged her artistry and nurtured her development as a painter. However, he was persistently unfaithful, even with Frida's sister, Christina. Heartbroken, Frida sought comfort in her own affairs with both men and women, reportedly including Leon Trotsky and artist Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939 but remarried the following year under new conditions. This time, Frida maintained her independence, her house, her finances, and her name. Their renewed marriage focused less on romantic ideals and more on artistic collaboration and shared respect. Despite the pain and infidelities, Diego continued to be a steady presence in Frida's life. He pushed her boundaries. He hurt her, yet he also had unwavering faith in her, as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman capable of transforming the art world. Their relationship wasn't calm, but it was iconic. During the 1930s, Frida Kahlo traveled with Diego Rivera to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, while he worked on major mural projects. Her time abroad exposed her directly to American industrial power, immense wealth, and the paradoxes of capitalism, leaving her politically unsettled. Frida was a devoted Mexican nationalist, a staunch communist, and a passionate advocate for indigenous culture. Witnessing the extravagance of the U.S., particularly during a period when the Great Depression devastated many, intensified her feelings of disillusionment. In her letters back home, she ridiculed the materialism and image-driven values of American culture. She longed for the rawness, vibrancy, and complexity of Mexico. As Diego created massive murals on industrial walls, Frida turned inward, producing smaller, more introspective pieces on tin and canvas. Her artistic voice took shape, bold, surreal, deeply emotional, and profoundly personal. During this period, she created some of her most iconic self-portraits. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity, she painted to endure. Her identity became her terrain. Enduring relentless physical pain from her accident, numerous surgeries, and a miscarriage in Detroit, she looked inward. Her self-portraits revealed her wounded, divided, and laid bare. Yet her expression remained composed, unwavering, and unapologetic. In one of her most powerful pieces, Henry Ford Hospital, she depicts herself weeping on a hospital bed, encircled by haunting symbols of grief. A fetus, a snail, surgical tools, a fractured pelvis. The painting was visceral, unflinching, and emotionally intense. A canvas that bled with raw honesty. Back in Mexico, Frida dove deeply into leftist politics. She and Diego hosted Leon Trotsky in their home during his exile. Frida donned Tijuana dresses, traditional indigenous clothing, not merely as style but as a bold political and cultural declaration. Her art was always intertwined with her convictions. Her identity, her physical being, and her beliefs were all woven together in her art. While Rivera created murals celebrating revolution, Frida focused on its human toll. The fragmented body, the burning mind, and the self forever confronting itself. Amid exile and suffering, she emerged not only as a painter of pain, but as a symbol of resistance. When Frida Kahlo came back to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was more than just Diego Rivera's wife. She had transformed into a powerful force, an artist whose work pulsed with raw truth, surreal imagery, and deep cultural pride. Back home, she fully embraced her own identity. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacan became a vibrant refuge of color and complexity. The house featured bright cobalt walls, yellow accents, Aztec statues in the garden, with monkeys and parrots roaming freely. It was a vivid reflection of Frida's imagination, a fusion of tradition and defiance, sophistication and nature. Within these walls, she filled the space with pre-Columbian artifacts, exotic objects, folk art, and radical literature. She donned striking Tijuana dresses, braided flowers into her hair, and painted surrounded by the aroma of copal incense and mariachi music drifting from the streets. This era sparked a surge of creativity. Her artworks grew increasingly detailed, symbolic, and politically charged. Pieces like The Two Fridas exposed her fractured identity. One figure wore European attire with a bleeding heart, while the other donned indigenous dress, appearing strong and composed. This was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrayal of love, loss, and cultural roots. In 1939, she showcased her work in Paris, earning admiration from artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky for her uniquely bold style. Yet, even among the surrealists, Frida remained distinct. When André Breton attempted to claim her as one of the surrealists, she resisted. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said, "but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She portrayed Mexico, not the idealized postcard image, but the vibrant, living country she loved. Her art was rich with symbolism: skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She paid tribute to the indigenous heritage of her country while exposing the violence embedded in its history and present. Despite her artistic voice growing more powerful, her health steadily worsened. Repeated surgeries, infections, and constant pain became part of her everyday life. Yet she kept painting, often supported in bed, her torso wrapped in corsets, her fingers gripping the brush tightly. Frida returned to Mexico not to find rest, but to reclaim her strength through her art, her politics, and her unapologetic embrace of herself. Throughout the 1940s, her body continued to fail her. Her spine worsened, and her right leg was plagued by persistent infections. Over her lifetime, she endured more than 30 surgeries, frequently back-to-back and exhausting. Sometimes she was confined to bed for months, trapped in body casts or held rigid by traction devices that pulled her bones apart. Yet, she continued to paint. Each piece became both an outlet and a form of defiance. Her art grew darker and more rebellious, created with a stark clarity honed by suffering, refusing to conceal anything behind metaphor. In The Broken Column, she depicts herself split down the center, her body pierced by nails, with a fractured ionic column standing in for her spine. Yet her expression remained stoic, her gaze unwavering. For Frida, pain was no longer merely a theme. It became her constant companion, her adversary, and her inspiration. Her political voice grew stronger as well. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, participated in protests, wrote passionate letters, and boldly challenged imperialism and injustice. When her health prevented her from walking, she showed up at protests in a wheelchair, boldly holding signs and chanting slogans. In 1953, Frida held her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long-awaited tribute to her work. Yet her condition was so delicate that doctors advised her not to attend. But she did exactly what only Frida would do. She was brought in by ambulance, carried on a stretcher, and laid in the middle of the gallery on her hospital bed. Adorned in traditional dress and surrounded by her art, she welcomed visitors with tequila, laughter, and the fierce spark still glowing in her eyes. Her last paintings were at once innocent and haunting. In Marxism, give health to the sick. She portrayed herself wearing a steel corset, supported by the hands of Marx, discarding symbols of oppression. Her final known painting was a still life of sliced watermelons, one piece inscribed with the phrase, "Viva la vida, long live life." Even confronting death, she stayed defiant, joyful, and politically charged. Frida Kahlo's final portraits were more than self-portraits. They were revolutionary acts, created through pain but always marked by a celebration of life. On July 13, 1954, at 47 years old, Frida passed away in the very place she was born, Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her hinted at something more profound. She had indeed been sick, but also worn down by pain, countless surgeries, and a prolonged battle with her own body. Only days earlier, despite being weak and confined to a wheelchair, she had joined a political protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala, her fist raised defiantly. Revolution was her final enduring pulse. Her final diary entry was short but profound. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Frida's funeral took place at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most esteemed cultural venue. Her body, covered with the red flag of the Mexican Communist Party, was guarded by friends, family, artists, and fellow revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable. He called her the greatest love of his life, despite the betrayals that had nearly shattered her. Yet in the years after her death, something remarkable occurred. Frida Kahlo refused to fade away. Initially, her name was spoken quietly within art circles. Her work defied easy labels, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for the traditionalists. Gradually, her image, story, and spirit of defiance started to strike a chord. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists revived overlooked voices, Frida's grew more prominent. She became more than just a painter. She emerged as a symbol of transforming pain into beauty. Feminism forged through resistance, unapologetic Mexican identity, as well as queerness, disability, revolution, and genuine authenticity. Her face, unibrow, piercing gaze, and flowers in her hair became iconic symbols. Her home was transformed into a museum. Her diary became a revered text, and her paintings now hang in some of the world's most prestigious museums. Frida Kahlo had spent much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped into the light. She left behind more than just art. She left us a mirror, challenging everyone to truly see. Not with pity, not with fear, but with fierce passion. Today, Frida Kahlo's image is everywhere. Printed on t-shirts, painted on murals, made into dolls, memes, posters, and symbols. Her distinctive unibrow, flower-crowned hair, and intense gaze are instantly recognizable. Yet what truly gives her legacy power isn't just familiarity with her face. It's the recognition of the truth it holds. Frida never aimed for perfection. She refused to be boxed in. She was unconventional and unapologetic about it. In a world obsessed with flawlessness, she offered authenticity. Raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, and beautifully contradictory. She embraced what set her apart: her disability, her queerness, her politics, and her culture, transforming them into art that crossed boundaries and endured through time. She has become more than just an artist. She is a worldwide emblem of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance. For queer communities, she stands as a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly and unapologetically in an era that demanded silence. For women, she serves as a powerful reminder that strength needs no permission. For disabled artists, she stands as proof that pain can drive the brush rather than halt it. And for Mexico, she is a reclaimed daughter, fierce, folkloric, and eternally woven into the national spirit. Her paintings, once criticized as too unusual or too intimate, are now some of the most celebrated worldwide. Pieces like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column are not merely viewed. They resonate deeply with anyone who has endured pain and transformed that suffering into something sacred. She lived on the margins and made them the spotlight. She embraced contradiction, a communist who adorned herself with gold, a woman betrayed who still loved, a body shattered, yet a soul unbreakable. Through it all, she painted not only with color, but with unwavering conviction. Frida Kahlo never sought to be a symbol. She simply spoke her own truth, and in doing so voiced the experiences of millions who had never before seen themselves in art. Today, when we see her face, we see courage, color, resistance. We see Frida, not gone, but immortal.